Here is my reaction to the debate between Kyle Kulinski, Crystal Ball, Pondering Politics, and Hutch. I skipped their opening statements because they all basically agreed that the strong point of Kamala's campaign was Tim Walz, and they disagreed on if Tim Walz and Kamala should be welcoming Dick Cheney and Liz Cheney into the campaign. I made my own video on this. Please check that out. I wish I got this debate, but I will live through Hutch and Pondering Politics because Kyle Kulinski looks pretty silly here. Yeah, I don't really care about Kamala doing media interviews a month ago. No one's talking about her lack of interviews at the start, and it was much more important for them to nail down a message and a strategy for the campaign. Right now, the media push is smart 2 weeks out from the election when early voting's actually going on, especially in this current culture where a news story can last like 5 seconds before it's gone. It's cool that they waited till now to actually do that.
Listen, I understand, and I'm open to the strategy of embracing Republicans, having them on the DNC stage, basically, leaning into this idea of we have a broad anti-Trump coalition, and look at even these reasonable Republicans who served with Trump, who previously supported him, like they're in our camp now. But I don't think you can do that alone, and I also think they've leaned too hard into that strategy. Embracing Dick Cheney and thanking him for his service would be a perfect example of leaning too hard in that direction, both from a moral standpoint, because Dick Cheney is, I think, one of the most evil and nefarious wrongdoers in America.
I promise you, there is not one voter who heard Kamala call Dick Cheney hero or thank you for your service. Or she didn't say hero, right? She said thank you for your service to this country. There is not one voter who was turned away by that statement. I guarantee you. I promise. You cannot find that voter. But her going closer to Cheney will help many of those Bush Republicans, more neocon-leaning voters. And that's why Kamala also said at the DNC, I promise we're going to have the most lethal fighting force. I know progressives had an issue with that as well. But it does work for the voting groups that are still available. And that's what we're looking at. What voters are still available?
American politics, certainly in modern history. But also from a tactical perspective, like, Dick Cheney left office with a 13% approval rating. Liz Cheney is similarly not particularly popular. So I'm not sure that they are getting as much out of it tactically as they think they are. But my bigger beef is the fact that they haven't paired that with leaning into a consistent messaging on bread and butter issues. I was also extremely excited when she picked Tim Walz because I thought, here's a guy that's got like a ready-made agenda that he actually passed in the state of Minnesota, and she can
they debated.
Just rip that off. Like, I'm going to do what Tim did there. We're going to pass paid family leave. We're going to make sure people can, go to free public college. We're going to do tax breaks for the working class. Like, it was all free school lunch, free school breakfast. It was all sort of there for. And I'm not saying that she hasn't had policy plans and that they don't talk about it, but there isn't this consistent, overwhelming, these are the 3 things she's going to say every time she opens her mouth. And those are things that are,
Well, yeah, she says the tax credit for families, the small business tax deductions, and now she's talking about Medicare and expanding Medicare to cover at-home care because of the sandwich generation. She knows which voters she is targeting. Talking about free school lunches at this point is not going to increase your voter turnout. We need to understand these suburban undecided voters are the largest voter pool Democrats and Kamala can pull from right now. And that's why her messaging sounds like that. I agree at the beginning, she did not have a good answer for what is your campaign? What is your main goal as president? What are you going to do on day one? Even though it's a dumb question, you should still have something ready for that. So that's probably my biggest complaint with Kamala. They could have much more direct responses to these things, to these questions that are more policy focused and direct to the point. But I also understand they're doing a balancing act, trying to look at these voters that are actually gettable and thinking about what messaging strategy can execute to do that.
I think they're progressive, but they're also centrist in that they are the center of American economic opinion. So to me, the problem isn't that she has this, like, let me brag about the Republicans that support me strategy. It's leaning too heavily on that. The endorsement from Dick Cheney is just unacceptable in general, but leaning too heavily into that without also countering it with, things that would get young people, working class people more excited about her campaign. And then obviously to me,
there's no young people or working class people right now that are not voting, that are thinking, oh, Trump versus Harris. if only Harris talked more about her populist economic agenda, then I'd vote for her. Like, this is so unrealistic. We're talking about the most unreliable voter groups that are already decided on who they're going to vote for. And I know people are going to say comments like, oh, I was going to vote for Kamala, then she welcomed Dick Cheney and whatever. But no, dude, if you're a progressive and you're not voting Harris, you were never going to vote Harris no matter what. No matter what Harris did, even if they called for a weapons embargo, you would not have voted for Harris. It's just how it is. They'll move the goalpost every time. And I agree, Cloud, about the issue with talking about what the base actually is. I don't know. Yeah, the base is voting for Kamala. The base is voting. And we already have on the ground canvassers and organizers getting the base out. Like getting the base out to actually vote in numbers. My biggest concern right now is making sure we have good information everywhere so that Republican election clerks who are very conspiracy minded don't try to throw out votes or hack election machines, which there is verified evidence of Republicans doing, not Democrats. The biggest issue right now is election integrity. And we need enough Democrats and poll watchers and whatever else might be available. If you can volunteer, that's what we need right now. That's what matters. The messaging of the Kamala campaign, it is what it is at this point. They're trying to increase their voters in some areas, but there's not going to be there's no evidence of like what Crystal and Kyle say. There's no real world evidence of this stuff working. And the campaigns that sound like what they're talking about are usually in plus 15 Democratic districts anyway.
The biggest just outrageous moral failure is continuing to back a genocidal policy in Gaza, not even really giving any sense that there's any distance whatsoever between herself and Joe Biden, which, you know, I believe that they think is a smart tactical decision. I think it's a disastrous tactical decision, but the more important thing is it's utterly, disgusting morally.
So let me give my answer, then we'll get your guys' reaction, because I thought a lot about this. What has she done that's good? What has she done that's bad? Let me start with the good. First, let me say
there are reasons, probably some reasons we don't know about, but also reasons we do know about for why they can't just fully cut off funding. And when Crystal says that, she's looking at 99% the morality of the situation, which, yes, if you're talking about morality, there's a certain, you want to have a strong action, but true morality is thinking about what's going to put us best in the position to change things in the future and to actually help. But yeah, there's no evidence that they can just cut off arms or whatever. If Iran and Hezbollah and Hamas did not exist, then this would be different. But there is a lot of money involved with AIPAC and supporting different candidates. And also, Americans are very pro-Israel. Americans have a hard time humanizing black and brown people in the United States, let alone across the ocean in the Middle East. And yeah, the idea that it would have helped their campaign is not true.
Sign off on everything you guys said about Tim Walz. Totally agree with that. That got me genuinely excited about Kamala. Like, I was genuinely like giddy the day that she picked Tim Walz. Yeah, because I know his record is phenomenal. So I love that. I loved when they came out of the gate with the weird stuff. The weird stuff took off like wildfire, and it all stemmed from a shoot from the hip comment from Tim Walz in an interview, and it just took off like.
And then the Biden admin people came in and made her stop that messaging. Okay, so I've heard this many times. Kyle's going to talk about the Biden admin people being dumb and not saying we're not going back and whatever else. There is some actual wisdom in the Biden people. Okay, so Biden won against Donald Trump by many votes. There is some wisdom in the fact that you cannot run an entire 2 or 3 month campaign just saying you are weird over and over again. Donald Trump brings it up enough. It's already in people's brains. We're not going back is still said. It's not going to be the #1 slogan, but that is not going to be a rallying cry for the voters who are not already decided. We're not going back appeals to the base. It got the base fired up when they needed to be fired up when the switch happened. Then everyone got on board. Everyone signed up to volunteer. Everyone got ready to donate. And then now the messaging pivots to the center, which is what you're supposed to do.
Like wildfire. It was great. I love the we're not going back stuff. People were chanting that at rallies endlessly. I love that they're embracing freedom, and they bring that up all the time. I love how they've basically stolen patriotism from the Republicans. I think that's great. Just recently, they both started using the F word about Donald Trump, fascist, and they cite General Mark Milley calling him that, and they say, look, the general said it. Well, what do you want me to say? It's true. He's saying it. I love that. I love the $6,000 child tax credit. I love the 3 million new homes. I love the policy where Medicare is going to cover home care. I think it's a crime that the media didn't talk about that more, and she's.
And Kyle right here is proving there is a solid policy foundation from the Harris campaign that they are talking about a lot. The media is not covering it well at all. The media is still talking about Bidenomics being a failure. The media is showing graphs comparing wage growth since September of last year and comparing inflation since 2021 and putting those graphs next to each other. The media is extremely dishonest. There's enough of a policy platform, more than enough, for policy-minded voters to be motivated to vote for Kamala. But these undecided voters who are still like, oh, Kamala or Trump, adding another policy to that list of, free school lunches and breakfast federally, adding that kind of stuff is not going to get more voters out. People that care about those policies and people that are motivated by those policies are already voting Kamala. They're already voting. There's not even a question on their mind on if they should go out to vote for Kamala. And that's why they're making all these appeals that Kyle doesn't like, because they're not trying to get Kyle's vote. Kyle's going to sit online and talk about purity politics and endorse Jill Stein. They're not looking to appease Kyle.
Out there touting it, and good on her for doing that. I love that in this the Fox interview.
Yeah, I agree. It is impressive. Very impressive. The shift from Biden to Harris was done. That's one of the most masterful political maneuvers I have ever seen. Like, I think when we go back in history, the fact the entire party was able to come together to do that shift strongly, and without many news stories getting out about bad will and about negativity, like the fact they were able to do that and still stay together as a party was extremely unexpected.
Interview. I love that. I think she did a great job. She hit Trump on getting out of the Iran deal. I thought that was great. The bad stuff is as follows, in my opinion. There was reporting that the Biden team kind of talked her off of the weird framing and the we're not going back framing. They changed we're not going back to turn the page or something like that. It's just not popping as much as we're not going back. So that's just a little messaging thing there that I have issue with. I loved when she came out of the gates talking about the ban on price gouging, because it's great politics, because then you baited the Republicans into calling you a communist, and then they had to go out there and functionally they were defending price gouging. And there's like 39 states in the country that have bans on price gouging if there's like a natural disaster or something like that. She looked incredibly populist and incredibly anti-establishment, and Donald Trump and the Republicans were taking the mantle of, no, we're going to defend the establishment and we're going to defend Americans getting ripped off. So I love that, but she backed off of the ban on the price gouging thing after there was a lot of, noise around that. She didn't have the answer for the question.
Can we watch more of the actual debate, please? Or more of the debate? Actually, you can go watch the debate on their channel, and I don't want you in my chat. Just go watch it on their channel. Wait, how do I block you? I really don't care. I'm actually going to give analysis. If you don't want to hear my analysis, that's fine. I'll talk to 2 people if I need to. I'll talk to nobody if I need to. But comments like that are stupid. Can I watch more of the debate? Yeah, go watch the debate, or go watch someone else's reaction who's just going to make faces the entire time. Go have fun doing that.
I believe you alluded to this, Josiah. She didn't have an answer for the question, how are you different than Joe Biden, the first 2 times she was asked that. I think that's bad. I really, really dislike the saying that Iran is our biggest enemy. That just came out recently. And that is kind of the fear with like touting the Liz Cheney and the Dick Cheney stuff, is like, well, how much of this do you, like some foreign policy stuff, do you kind of agree with them on? Because the Iran thing, I don't like at all. Not saying Trump's good on Iran. He's actually, I think, worse on Iran, but that's neither here nor there. And
yeah, I know. She keeps talking about the price gouging. She talks about everything, but they don't see it, so they don't think it's happening because they don't actually exist in the real world. Like, I've been in these meetings, not in these meetings, but I've been at events and organizing events, and I've seen their campaign rallies. I watch a lot of them. I've been to a lot of them. They are talking about this. That's why it annoys me when Kyle Kulinski gives a huge post about like Kamala's campaign strategies backfiring or whatever.
To Crystal's point, leaning too much into the Cheneys supporting her, I think it's strategically wrong, and I think it's morally wrong. I'm okay with her saying like Liz Cheney endorsed me. What I have a problem with is doing a big event where you like brag about it and saying the thing about thank you for your service to Dick Cheney.
People love that. I heard so many positive things from Republicans about that event. When that event happened, I heard so many positive things with Liz Cheney, and they're going to be doing that in Pennsylvania, and that's a good thing.
And as evidence of my theory, I would, and this, earlier in the week, I was very down on the campaign, and the reason was there was a new slate of polls that came out, and it looked like she dropped about 2 points, and this came right on the heels of all of like the Cheney stuff.
Cheney
I'm not saying it's exclusively the fault of the Cheney stuff. stuff, but I think it's just this broader trend that I was afraid of. Now, she has course corrected since then a little bit with this Fox News interview, which I think was great. But the point is, Liz Cheney, as you pointed out, 93% voting with Trump. Dick Cheney had a 13% approval rating, as you pointed out, lied us into the Iraq war, ordered illegal torture, ordered illegal spying, got rid of due process and habeas corpus, took $44 million from Halliburton and gave them no-bid contracts afterwards, had Guantanamo Bay, expanded the doctrine of unitary executive theory, which is the thing that we all are like, no, Trump wants to expand unitary executive theory. Dick Cheney did that. So the problem is, and then I'll turn it over to you guys. I'm sorry, I know I've been going for a long time here.
No, go ahead.
So it's strategically bad, and I think it's substantively bad because Dick Cheney I view as Trump before Trump. And the larger issue is what I worry about Democrats, and this happened with Hillary in 2016, is you end up appealing to Republicans in the general election. Okay. But you over appeal to Republicans while Republicans appeal to their base. So I guess the point is, stop taking your base for granted like Hillary. I think they should care more about Arab Americans and Muslim Americans and Lebanese Americans, particularly in Michigan. This is a demographic that they should be winning by massive numbers, and care more about young voters and just give less attention to Dick Cheney. Finally, the thing I would do to check this box of try to get Republican votes, go to, like, you know how Trump made a big deal about saving the carrier factory and then they ship the jobs overseas anyway. You go take some people from the carrier factory who lost their jobs and they're Republicans, and you do an event with them, and they say, hey, I voted for Donald Trump, but he stabbed us in the back, and I lost my job. And 200,000 manufacturing jobs were outsourced under Trump. That's the way of, like, appealing to working class Republicans.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying about the policies. Getting motivated to get out of the House to vote. The base, quote unquote, like the base is going to be out to vote because of Donald Trump and because the Harris campaign has been pretty good. I'm just saying that extra policy added on isn't going to be the change in their decision to actually get out and vote. They are more than enough motivated. Right now, it's about getting low information or no information voters out. And yeah, the progressives, like I said, who are not voting Kamala because of Israel-Palestine, they are not going to vote Kamala no matter what. And there's a big chance they didn't vote for Kamala, or not Kamala, but they didn't vote for Democrats in 2016 or 2020 either. I think we forget that in the conversation of Jill Stein, who is teaming up with Elon Musk to send disinformation to Muslim voters in Michigan, which is why she's doing so well there. But they had a third-party campaign to help Donald Trump win in 2016 before October 7th, before the current campaign, and before the current activist push for Palestinian rights. So they always find a reason to say don't vote Democrat and let the fascist win. They always find a reason to.
As opposed to taking elitist war criminal Republicans who nobody likes and running around the country with them. I'm sorry for how long that was. Hutch, I'll let you respond first since you did the video, and then Josiah will get your reaction.
Yeah. Well, you brought up Liz Cheney's favorability ratings by the time she left office. The reason why her favorability ratings were so low is because she made the decision to essentially willingly sacrifice her political career to go after Trump.
I didn't bring that up. I brought up Dick Cheney's, not Liz. Liz, I didn't bring up her favorability.
You know, I'm not sure how much I would push back against the Dick Cheney thing. I think Josiah and I both probably agree that maybe she used a little too soft language with that, like saying she was like thanking him for his service. I think is probably a little bit too far.
Too far on because you don't think it's tactically sound, or because you don't think it's morally sound, since you would accept Satan's endorsement if you thought it moved some votes.
Well, maybe both. Maybe I was being a bit hyperbolic when I said I would accept Satan's, but
he's actually worse than Satan. That's the point.
Sure. I mean, I feel like wasn't there a quote from who's the actor that played him in the movie? I think he said he took inspiration from Satan when he was trying to.
Oh.
Yeah, right. So yeah, but going back to what you were saying about like how she should be differing herself from Biden, there was a part in a video that you made recently where you said one of the ways that you would differ yourself from Biden would be that you would say that you would have gone about Build Back Better differently, and you would have forced Joe Manchin to just go along with this piece of legislation. This is one of the big sticking points that I have with probably both of you guys. What does that look like when you say you're going to force Joe Manchin to sign on to legislation? Because when I look at every single president is going to be constrained by the Congress that they have. Even LBJ and FDR, who had absurd majorities.
I'm pretty sure at that time, I remember that story, Kyle Kulinski recommended that Biden threaten federal contracts for West Virginia if Joe Manchin didn't support this bill. I think Kyle actually said that.
in comparison to what Biden was working with in 2021. He had a 50-50 Senate, and what do we have, like an 8-seat majority in the House? And so you basically need perfect unanimity in the party if you want to pass any part of your agenda. I look at his legislative track record, and I'm impressed. Like, to me, Joe Biden has been the most successful president legislatively in the modern era, and it's
I agree.
Not even
domestically, I agree.
Particularly close. So yeah, I guess I would want to press you guys on, or press you, Kyle, specifically when you say you would force Joe Manchin to just sign on to Build Back Better. What does that actually look like in practice?
Okay, I'm glad you asked that question. That's a phenomenal question. So it's basically the carrot and stick approach. So you mentioned LBJ there, you mentioned FDR there. Yes, they had big majorities, but they also knew how to play politics in a way that modern day Democrats in the neoliberal era, I don't think they play politics nearly as well. So for example, Joe Manchin's daughter is a pharmaceutical criminal, and she's in part responsible for jacking up, what is it, the insulin prices colossally?
Don't remember.
I don't know if it was insulin or something else, but
I think it was insulin.
There was reporting on how his daughter is basically a pharma criminal. And for somebody like Joe Manchin or for somebody like Kyrsten Sinema, basically if you're president, you use the bully pulpit a little bit, you call them into your office and you say, look, you're a Democrat, you could be a hero and they'll build statues to you, or you'll be my biggest enemy. And so you get to choose. If you don't vote with Build Back Better, then the Democratic Party is going to use all of our resources to fund a primary opponent against you to try to take you out. Or if you do the right thing, like I said,
no, that's just dumb on face value. Okay, that's dumb. A primary opponent to take you out, Joe? What do you mean? Joe Manchin, okay, what he's been able to do in West Virginia has been the biggest margin consistently that a Democrat's been able to win, or an independent's been able to win in such a red state. What primary opponent are you going to fund to get Joe Manchin out? The primary opponent that ran against him and got like 10% of the vote?
Build statues to you. So use this. I mean, this is what politics always has been, right? There's a lot of ugly stuff that goes on behind closed doors, but if you're doing tactical stuff behind closed doors, that ends up...
This sounds like a Donald Trump plan. This is where populists start to fall apart a little bit. I mean, I guess you can threaten some things in politics. It is politics. But yeah, that's a little bit wild. We're only going to investigate your criminal pharmaceutical money stealing daughter if you don't sign on to this bill. Are you kidding me? Do you think Joe Manchin doesn't go public with that, with the other things Joe Manchin has said?
Getting the American people colossal wins that they need, like Build Back Better, which I think was a phenomenal piece of legislation. I think that's how you do it. And I'm not saying it would have worked, because I don't know if it would have worked. But what I'm saying is it would have been the right path to at least get maybe more, as opposed to we got the Inflation Reduction Act, which was good, but it was what, maybe 20% of what was in the original Build Back Better. So I just don't see that Biden and modern day Democrats, Obama, Clinton, they don't have the same sort of commitment to social democracy as, say, FDR had. And so they don't want to play that dirty game of politics behind the scenes.
FDR was not a social democrat. He was a progressive in the sense of greatly expanding government programs, but he was not like an ideological social democrat in the same way we use those words today. If you're talking about a huge welfare state, yeah, but I feel like when we say social democrat today, we're talking about more socialist leanings than just like New Deal stuff. I feel like we're talking about like building on top of the New Deal and going much further. And the authoritarian power, and you can call it authoritarian just because FDR had so much executive power. We're lucky he used it in a good way, but he had like 80% of the House and Senate, I'm pretty sure. So you can't compare those margins FDR had to the margins that Joe Biden had. It's just not realistic at all. If Joe Biden had 80 Democrats in the Senate and 400 Democrats in the House, of course he'd do a lot more with it.
Whereas when you look on the Republican side, I think Trump does use the bully pulpit. He does use the carrot or the stick. He just uses it for really, really bad things, which we hate.
Can I just offer one other example
Sure.
that I think is a little more clear cut than, because you're right, Build Back, he could have promised Joe Manchin, like, I'm going to pave West Virginia in gold and you're going to be a hero. And, if you don't go with us, like, he could have used that approach, and there's no guarantees that it would have.
You're going to pave West Virginia in gold? What ability does Joe Biden have to offer exclusive federal contracts to just West Virginia? Unless if you mean like, I don't know, put something else in the infrastructure plan for West Virginia, but I'm pretty sure per capita, West Virginia is one of the states that benefited by far the most from the infrastructure bill, from the bipartisan plan. And Build Back Better and everything. Like, are we gonna? I don't know what that means. What is that? What does that meeting sound like?
Worked because of who Joe Manchin is and his,
Is Joe Biden gonna have populist protests all throughout West Virginia so Joe Biden can come yell about Joe Manchin and get the West Virginia voters to pressure Joe Manchin? I don't know, man. This is why we have to get more Democrats elected.
That approach, and there's no guarantees that it would have worked because of who Joe Manchin is and his, political realities and whatever. There's no guarantees. But you also had a situation where they were trying to push through a $15 minimum wage increase. And they went to the parliamentarian and said, can we do this? And parliamentarian is not an elected official. There's nothing in the law that says you have to, that the decisions of the parliamentarian, which are really just meant to be guidance, are binding. What's more, you can hire a new parliamentarian at any time.
That's what Bush did.
And instead they're just like, no, they said no, so I guess we can't do it.
I'd like to respond to this if I
You can agree with parts of that. Just in a sense of liberals relying so much on norms to dictate how they use power. We're seeing that dissolve through the Trump era. A lot of our government's powers and stability and our institutions are based on norms and procedures. So if those procedures and norms are not followed, so like the parliamentarian, or like not eliminating the filibuster, then eventually the thinking is, if you don't do enough to protect freedoms, if good people don't do enough, if good actors in government don't do enough, eventually an authoritarian is going to come violate those norms and use any authoritarian power they can grab from those norms. So I do agree with that in a sense.
may, because
Yeah,
Hutch
go ahead.
actually
Sure,
changed
go
my
ahead.
mind on one of these things. So just again, full disclosure, I'm totally sympathetic. If you look at my Twitter feed or my YouTube videos, one of the things I advocate for is a more ruthless Democratic Party. It's one of the reasons why, again, I am so impressed by the selection of Governor Tim Walz, because again, this is a person who leverages power despite razor-thin majorities.
Correct,
If you have
yeah.
power and you're dealing with a minority opposition, you should do everything that is tactically feasible to push through your agenda. And I do think that Democrats sometimes struggle with that posture. You know, Attorney General Merrick Garland, to me, is a classic example of a guy who, you know, this was an appeal to bipartisanship. You know, he was a successful prosecutor back in the day. He was a centrist judge, President Obama's Supreme Court nominee. And I almost like as a mulligan or a consolation prize, like, hey, we couldn't make you a Supreme Court justice, we'll make you an attorney general. I think he's a very intelligent man. I think in many ways he's been a disastrous attorney general because he has been so lethargic. He's quick to prosecute and investigate Democrats. He drags his feet when it comes to Donald Trump. So this to me is just a great example. However, I do think that the realities of the 50-50 split Senate would make it extremely difficult and very dangerous for President Biden to have put the sort of pressure on Joe Manchin that you talk about. So Joe Manchin being a very conservative Democrat in a state that is effectively unwinnable for the Democrats, there's no way that a Democrat's going to win West Virginia outside of Joe Manchin. I think that had President Biden done what you suggested, Kyle, it would have been very easy for Joe Manchin to say, you know what, fuck you. I'm going to switch parties. I'm either going to become an independent who may caucus with the Republicans, or I may just go ahead and switch parties and become a Republican anyway. And he actually probably would have increased his likelihood of winning re-election should he, you know, if he had chosen to run for a second term. Kirsten Sinema is more vulnerable, so I'm more sympathetic to the carrot and stick approach with her since Arizona is a purple state. But it's not just that there's a risk of it not working. There's a risk of it backfiring spectacularly. And the only other thing I'll just say real quick to Crystal's point about the parliamentarian is I agree, President Biden could have pressured Chuck Schumer to fire the parliamentarian. That could have been done. But this is where actually Hutch persuaded me. He changed my mind on this because he pointed out that, if I remember correctly, Sinema and Manchin both opposed the $15 bill or provision in the bill. So even if they'd gotten it included in the bill, that probably just would have killed the bill. So sorry for, you know.
Yeah, and they would have been draining political capital for no reason at that point with no actual goals in sight. And there's still Biden appointments the Senate needs to confirm. There was still a bunch of other legislation that had to get passed through the Senate. So if Joe Biden takes one big populist stand on one bill, on one policy, on one appointment, then you're losing Joe Manchin for every other vote for the next 4 years. So yeah, there are more calculations than just what's in front of you. And you need to be able to have a sober perspective to look at all this so you don't use your emotions to just try and pound things through government. Trump can do that because being a Republican, being Trump, you just got to tear things apart. You don't need to build. It's a lot harder to build. You have to be a lot more intentional with the way you act.
That's my spiel.
Go ahead, Hutch.
People bring up
go ahead, Hutch.
people bring
then
up
I'll
the
respond to that.
Right. People bring up the parliamentarian as though it's an example of fecklessness, and to me, it's just an example of just pretty basic logic. Like it wouldn't have mattered if it fired the parliamentarian, because yeah, to Josiah's point, he's absolutely right. Both Sinema and Manchin, as far as I'm aware, were on the record against the $15 an hour minimum wage. And I have a sense that they probably wouldn't have been the only ones. Like there might have been like 3 or 4 other Democratic senators who were not open about it, who might have voted against that $15 an hour minimum wage. When you talk about Joe Manchin's daughter in the bully pulpit, I don't really know what that means. It sounds like what you're saying is that Joe Biden should have
open a criminal investigation. Open a criminal investigation. If you don't vote for Build Back Better, we're going to open a criminal investigation because she objectively is a criminal, not because it's bullshit and she's not a criminal. I'm not saying do a fake investigation. I'm saying do a real investigation. Who is supposed to make that threat?
Who is supposed to make that threat?
Joe Biden, anybody in the administration, be very direct with them. Say, look, like I said, you'll be a hero or you'll be our biggest enemy. And it's not like the daughter isn't a criminal. I mean, I think she should be prosecuted anyway, but I'd be willing to not prosecute if Joe Manchin's vote comes on for either Build Back Better.
Okay. I think you should be willing to prosecute, but I won't prosecute. This is why populism falls flat. So we need to change norms and change how government's done and change how aggressive liberals are and all that kind of stuff. But saying that we should be holding that kind of thing in the balance for a vote that was going to fail regardless, that's an impeachment waiting to happen. That's a national news story. That's so many bad things that come from that. And it doesn't even work. It's not realistic. Like, the world's more complicated. Like, I don't know. That sounds like some mafia stuff Donald Trump would talk about.
Better, or at least a piece of legislation that is stronger than what the IRA ended up being.
Well, here's how I see that playing out. Joe Biden invites Joe Manchin into the Oval Office and says, listen, if you don't sign on to this Build Back Better as is, I'm going to sick Merrick Garland on your daughter. First of all, and if he actually relayed that plan to Merrick Garland, first of all, I think Merrick Garland would have resigned immediately and gone to the press and said, I cannot serve under a corrupt administration who would sick the DOJ on a political opponent to try to whip votes for a piece of legislation that I like. And I think, to Josiah's point, Joe Manchin would have immediately switched to either independent or Republican, and then there goes your majority, and you don't get any legislation done whatsoever.
Joe Manchin ended up going independent after this, right? So it at least delayed Joe Biden going independent, or not Joe Biden, but Joe Manchin he went independent later after supporting appointments and supporting a decent number of bills. And the fact Joe Biden was able to masterfully leverage government at that point with such a deadlocked Senate to get so many things passed is amazing. Like, it's so impressive. But they're using this as a negative somehow. And if Kyle was making decisions for Biden, I'd probably say 10% of Biden's legislation gets done. And I've been on record saying that Joe Biden got more progressive policies passed than Bernie Sanders would have been able to. In 1,000 elections, Joe Biden being president gets more progressive policies and initiatives done than Bernie Sanders does, because being able to use government, being able to use who is available, which it sucks. We don't have the best roster, but just being able to work with what we got.
But I don't know why that's corrupt.
This idea,
yeah, I would say so.
It's corrupt. We have longstanding norms.
I mean, you already know that I agree with Hutch's and Josiah's opinions on this. I wish I could have this conversation too, but like I said before, I'm living through them.
The DOJ separate from politics. The president is never supposed to be able to just sick the DOJ on whoever they want. Donald Trump did it openly in the final month. I mean, he did it openly during his entire presidency, but he did it openly in the final month of the 2020 election. He was publicly pressuring Bill Barr to go after Joe Biden, and we called it corrupt at the time because it is. The president is not supposed to, and they shouldn't be allowed to use the DOJ to pressure some kind of like political outcome. This is like a big disagreement that you and I have. I don't think that this is a reasonable proposition.
Well, let me ask you this.
I think he would have been impeached. I think Biden would have been impeached by his own party. He would have done something like that.
Apart from the strategy tied to Build Back Better, do you think Joe Manchin's daughter should be prosecuted anyway?
I'm not familiar with the case, but if she is like breaking the law or whatever, of course, I mean, I would support anybody who is doing any kind.
That's an interesting question. Okay, so what if that wasn't a direct conversation, but Joe Biden knew and the government knew? I don't know. What if they knew that prosecuting Joe Manchin's daughter would ruin legislative priorities? They don't threaten to do it, but they know if they do go after her, then Joe Manchin's going to back out of the party completely. Is that a calculation that they made? Maybe.
Kind of like, I
I'm
don't
not saying Merrick Garland was involved, but I'm sure someone had that calculation somewhere, and that was a conversation. But I don't even know what this case is. Is Joe Manchin's daughter really liable for a federal criminal case?
Oh, whatever. Of course. I mean, I would support anybody who is doing any kind of like, what did you say she was involved with? Like it's some kind of pharma thing?
Involved with, she works for a pharmaceutical company, and she was involved in jacking the price of insulin. But even beyond that, if you take Kirsten Sinema, for example, there were articles coming out about how she took, I forget the exact number, it was either $1 million or $2 million from pharma lobbyists. And at that exact time, she flipped her vote and was against lowering all the drug prices. They ended up getting a compromise where they ended up lowering, I believe it was 10 drug prices and then more over time. But so my point is, that's an example of like brazen corruption, but technically it's legal. So to have a president basically call that out and say, we're not going to stand for it, and we're going to use hard politics behind the scenes to try to get good things done for the American people, I don't view that as corrupt. I view that as a competent president fighting for the American people. And I think that's the core of our disagreement, because if you look at, say, like the filibuster, for example, I think the filibuster is kind of absurd. I'd be okay with going back to the original filibuster where you actually have to filibuster, like you have to talk. But now
where
they
the
just
burden is actually on the filibustering party and not something where they can just kick back.
Now they just say, I'm invoking the filibuster and you need 60 votes to get it through. So even with something, to your point about like, oh, you know, I don't think it's fecklessness, the parliamentarian thing. Well, then it's definitely fecklessness to not at least have more exceptions to the filibuster or go back to the...
Yeah, that's true. Biden was not active enough on that front. From what I can find, Joe Manchin's daughter, there was a scandal involved with like artificially moving prices, but I don't think that's something you can open a federal criminal investigation for. I feel like that'd be tried in a different manner. I'm trying to think who would... I guess Merrick Garland could be involved in that, but judging on who would take a case like that, it would just be a fine at most if they pursued it, and it's shaky on if it was even like a straight up crime or not.
The original filibuster, because there's already 161 exceptions to the filibuster. Why not add more for specific policies? Like Kamala came out to her credit the other day and said we'd get rid of the filibuster for Roe v. Wade. I don't know why you just stop there. You're arbitrarily handcuffing yourself. And if the argument is, well, down the road, Republicans will use 51 votes to get bad things, and it's like, okay, and then they'll lose the election and you get back in there and you do good things again. So I think the filibuster is undemocratic and we should nuke the filibuster. And so I don't view these things as like corrupt on behalf of Biden if he were to fight for these things. I view it as like, that's what I want from a president. FDR threatened to pack the Supreme Court. And just because of the threat, the Republicans backed down and voted to keep what was it?
But his own Congress said no. But going back to your point there, it's difficult for me to wrap my head around this idea that threatening to wield the DOJ as your personal political tool, like you can't, it's difficult for me to understand. You can't see how that could backfire if all of a sudden this became the new norm, because there's no laws technically.
Well, you already said Republicans are already doing
determine
it.
whether or not to determine whether or not.
Dirk.
Yeah, but they get bad press for that. Like that.
It's about the new norms. They do get bad press. Kyle's really upset with that comment apparently. But the thing is, if we're gonna have a system where a filibuster's gone and there's rapid change every administration, that might be where we're at right now. Donald Trump's going to come in. He's not going to care about that stuff. They're going to get rid of the filibuster. They're going to do anything they want. So if liberals are going to eliminate the filibuster, once they win and are in the position to, if they believe in a government that doesn't move, if they believe incremental change is necessary, we need processes and all that kind of stuff. We need to regulate and put more boundaries and ethical violations on the Supreme Court. Not being able to take bribes, for example, which they are allowed to. The Supreme Court is the most corrupt part of the U.S. government. But if they want to do that, then ruthlessly use that power in order to force the system to be that way, at least. When Democrats get back into the control position, they need to go hard on doing something to fix the gaps in the system right now. We cannot rely this much on norms to keep everything together. Norms are not enough. Please drop a like on the stream.
Donald Trump is the first one-term president since 1992. He was the most ineffective president in terms of legislation in modern history. He got the tax cuts done. That's the only thing he got done.
Yeah, so this idea that him being...
But I guess the
he
point
did a lot of bad things,
to move off of that.
Because you could do bad things as an executive without having any consensus in Congress. That's why we don't want Donald Trump in the executive. You can do bad things. You can't do good things. You cannot put together policy from the executive just by forcing it through. Of course he did bad things. You could do bad things. You know you could tear it apart. Like, it's so much easier to do that than it is to build.
So
Yeah,
this
but
idea
he did
that
a lot of
him
bad
being,
things.
But I guess the
he did a
point
lot
is
of
did a lot
bad
of
things,
bad
but
things,
did,
to move
yeah.
off of
did
the
that corrupt pressure actually help him with his legislative agenda?
He
I
couldn't
would-
even get immigration policy done. All of Donald Trump's immigration policy were based on national emergency decrees and talking about how we need emergency orders at the border, like the stay in Mexico policy. Everything was done through executive action and evoking those emergency powers.
say
sort of
I would
obsessing-
argue the opposite.
we're sort of obsessing over this one example Kyle gave about the daughter. But I think the broader point is that there did not really seem to be any efforts to twist Joe Manchin's arm. Or to even offer like, hey, what do you want in West Virginia? Like, I'm not above that kind of like favor trading. Also, give him the equivalent of the Cornhusker kickback or whatever. It seemed like there was much more willingness to just accept defeat.
Well, they're against it. Okay.
Then he's against it. The parliamentarians against it. I guess we just can't do these things. And it speaks to the broader, I think, kind of philosophical or tactical disagreements that that we may have with you both, which is like, it seems like whenever it comes to that economically beneficial, progressive, or as I said before, it's really a centrist agenda, it seems like there's a lot more quit on that side of the ledger versus the embracing of a Dick Cheney or a Liz Cheney. And, to get back to that debate, one thing I wanted to ask about on the tactical soundness is, obviously, Michigan is one of the most key states in terms of Kamala's likely political, path to 270. It probably runs through Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. And there is a significant Arab American voting bloc in Michigan. And there's polling that suggests that a majority of them are actually going to vote for Jill Stein.
Okay, so they are voting for Jill Stein. All right, the populations that are voting Jill Stein, before they get into it, they're voting for her because many of them are anti-gay. These cities have banned pride flags. And also, Elon Musk's dark money and Republican dark money has taken the messaging into there that many of these voters are voting Donald Trump as well, because they're being told, oh, Donald Trump, this war didn't exist when Donald Trump was president. Jill Stein is the easy off-ramp from voting Kamala because Kamala's evil. Kamala's on Israel's side. And then Jewish people are being told that Kamala's on Palestine's side. So they're not voting for Jill Stein off of good information. They are being manipulated by Jill Stein's campaign.
You can tell Democrats are concerned about this because they're running now anti-Jill Stein ads. I cannot think that it helps their case.
Yeah, they're
when
right-wingers. They're
these
conservatives.
voters are looking at the fact that
Exactly.
you didn't have room for even a pro-Kamala Palestinian American speaker on the DNC stage, but somehow you have room for Dick Cheney in your party.
So again, I just want to say, as somebody who brought that up at the beginning, I totally believe, I mean, it's easy for me to armchair quarterback, but looking back on, I do think that was a colossal mistake by Vice President Harris, given the inclusivity of the DNC. And I was there. I mean, it was a totally wide range to not have, and I'm blanking on her name, but she was a state representative, I think from Georgia.
Yeah.
Yes, who was going to endorse the vice president and pro-Palestinian. I think that was a colossal error, 100%, and it almost undermined the inclusivity argument. But going back to the Cheney thing versus Michigan, I want to be very clear, and I don't want to speak for Hutch, but knowing him as I do, I'm confident he would agree with this. If you were able to produce polling which said, listen, yeah, Harris's approval rating or support among Republicans has gone from 5 to, I think, 9, according to the last New York Times Siena poll. But she's lost 15%, like in the same time, or like she's lost an equal or comparable or greater amount from liberals and otherwise people who are inclined to vote for her as a consequence of that. Then I think we'd all agree, well, then screw the Cheneys, jettison. We should always, if given a binary choice, I think we should just lean left more towards trying to appeal to the right. But I think Hutch's position, and this is where I feel, unless I can get evidence to the contrary, that accepting the endorsement of Liz Cheney, I just don't think, or have not seen data, that that's going to cost votes from the left flank. I can't imagine somebody's going to be like, hell yeah, I'm going to vote for Kamala Harris. She's accepted Tim Walz. But you know what? She said something nice about Liz Cheney, so I'm going to vote third party. I've just not seen any evidence.
Yeah, it's not the specific, you're right. It's not that specific thing. It's evidence of a potential broader trend which could be damaging.
Well, but I actually think there is evidence of this specific thing, which, obviously.
That she dropped 2 points right when she did it?
Yeah, it's difficult to pinpoint.
She didn't drop 2 points right when she did it. Okay, so if you don't understand polling, when you take polls that are a month apart, especially when we're getting close to the presidential election. They're going to crash together. They're going to be very close. No matter how close the race is, the polls are always very close at the end because pollsters don't want to look wrong, whether it goes one way or the other way. This has been true the last 50 years. They always crash together. So when Kyle Kulinski says these polls went down 2% over this month, that means nothing. Even if it wasn't close, those different survey samples, the different methodologies they use for these polls, a 2-point change is nothing in the polling. The averages have barely moved at all, making this big determination that because of Liz Cheney, the numbers have went down for Kamala is some of the dumbest, most lazy analysis you can possibly have. And yeah, exactly. She did not talk with Cheney about anything policy-wise, just saving democracy. Cheney is crawling, like I said before, on their hands and knees, Dick and Liz. They are coming to the pro-trans, pro-anti-price gouging, pro-trust busting, the pro-DEI party. They're coming to the pro-every social justice movement party and pro-higher taxes on the rich party, crawling because they want to protect America from becoming an authoritarian fascist state. That is why they're doing it. Even if they are bad, they still don't want America to be fascist. That's the only reason. Democrats are in the power position. Democrats have a chance now to welcome Republicans in and beat them into having better positions on things. That's how you do real political movements.
Point, but she was doing better in the polls before she leaned hard into the Cheney world, both Liz and Dick.
It's such bad analysis, dude.
Bringing Tim Walz on board, when she was announcing her price gouging proposal, when she was getting attacked as a communist for...
So when the campaign first started and the survey bias had all these Democrats and really excited liberals wanting to answer polls about Kamala, that's when she spiked. Before any of the campaigns were even tested against each other, because the decision just happened to put Kamala in the race instead of Biden. You couldn't trust any of those polls at all 2 weeks after that happened. Like, come on, dude.
Daring to stand up to companies that are, ripping off American consumers. That's when
That's been every conversation. That's been every rally. That has been every conversation Kamala and Tim Walz have been having. Tim Walz has been all across Pennsylvania talking about that. So has Kamala. And now AOC's coming. They have been using this messaging. Where are these guys getting their information from?
Her best. And so the slippage hasn't been massive, but given that it's a very closely divided country, it is significant and something we shouldn't ignore. And so now you're much more at like a 50-50 likelihood of success post Cheney world, embrace, versus previously it was more like a 60-40. And again, those things are significant. I'm not saying it's 100% determinative, but you do have to look at what she was doing in the campaign when it was succeeding at its highest levels versus how they're doing at this point.
So I agree. I agree with you, but I also think
I'm ready to wager. Okay. I guarantee you the voters who are going to decide who wins this election, they don't even know who Dick Cheney is. They probably don't even know who Liz Cheney is. They probably don't know who anything is. They don't know who or what anything is, okay? That's the truth.
Has since then, she's also saved it a little bit more. Like they've gotten better within the past few days because they're calling him a fascist and because she did the Fox News interview. But I agree with you that initially when it looked like that was going to be the trajectory, which is a very Hillary 2016 type trajectory, I was like, oh no, they're going to do it again. But let me ask you guys, because this is my grand theory, and I call this the Goldilocks zone for campaigning. I'm curious what both of you think of it. So to me, I actually like the idea of Kamala self-branding. I'm a centrist. I'm a moderate. Say those words and say it in every single interview. I actually love that. But I want her to pair it with saying, I'm a centrist. That's why I want to do free school breakfast and lunch for kids like Tim Walz did in Minnesota. I'm a centrist. I want 12 weeks paid family leave and 12 weeks paid sick leave. So make that the centrist position and then run with it. And then it becomes like, it's a branding thing. People be like, oh, Kamala, yeah, she's a centrist, right? But they associate that with good...
I feel like we're still in the 2016 primary, bro. This conversation feels so 2016 primary, 2020 primary, pre-pandemic. Like, oh, we just need the more progressive populist policies. They should make this a policy debate because I bet all the voters are voting on policy, dude. All the voters right now are like, oh, I need to learn more about policy nuance. They wake up every day, they eat their cereal, and they start researching policy nuance. That's what every undecided voter is doing right now.
Exactly. So what do you guys think of that?
I mean, I take your point. I mean, I feel like paid family leave has like 80% approval with the public.
It's about that, yeah.
Yeah, child tax credit, 70%. All those things are very popular.
Right. The difficult thing with public opinion polls for specific policies is that it doesn't necessarily indicate like, okay, it's gonna be like 80%.
Ooh, this is good.
easy.
He's gonna say some really good stuff here. Awesome. 21 viewers. Drop a like. We only have 6 likes. We only have 6. Drop a like if you're hanging out. You could be quiet. It's okay. I'm only on here to record this video, so I can put it on YouTube anyway. But you could drop a like. Just hang out, you know.
Is that it doesn't necessarily indicate like, okay, it's gonna be like 80% easy to get it done, because we all know that
Obviously,
in the Congress, with the way that everything's set up, the Republicans have these institutional advantages, and it's just really hard to get popular policy over the finish line. I lost my train of thought there. Josiah, you want to jump in there?
Well, no, I was going to say, so it's funny. I'm reminded of what Governor Walz said recently. It was like, one man's socialism is another man's neighborliness. And he got grilled on this, or at least she attempted to do so, Shannon Bream on Fox News. So she's like, so, this is the dictionary definition of socialist. So is this what you're getting at? And he's like, no, it's just that Donald Trump refers to anything Democrats ever tried to do ever as socialism.
Yeah,
and I'm saying
that really well.
Right, exactly. I'm saying that lazy, lax definition just refers to basic common sense things.
Let me.
Sorry,
I was just gonna say real quick,
Okay,
as far as like the moderate thing, I'm not the person to ask on this, Kyle, because when I hear the word centrist, I get triggered immensely because I have enormous contempt for it. But you're right. I mean, there is
Filthy
obviously
liberal.
an appeal
Me too.
to that, and maybe a branding campaign, just like she's trying to do with patriotism. This idea that patriotism is actually a liberal or progressive value because we love our country enough to recognize that it has issues that we need to fix, whereas Republicans and this cult of personality, they don't love America. They
Trump
love
hates
Donald Trump and
America.
would gleefully sell this country.
You're a former socialist back in 2018, 2019. Now you're a filthy liberal. Yeah, that's what happens when you kind of get involved in learning how the world functions. I know many liberals, by the way, who don't like it. They don't like politics. They don't like where policy is going. Ideally, if you talk to them for a while, they probably would say like the ideal future would be a social democracy, maybe something more socialist where people have more of a say and there's less wealth and less war and all that stuff. But they understand you're a liberal, even if your heart can be socialist, your heart can be for all these things, your heart can be for these good societies, but you can be a liberal and mean like, this is how the world works, man. I want to push for good things, and I'm doing it in a context that actually makes sense.
And all of its constituents down the river.
And you could be a socialist and just not call yourself a socialist and still make pragmatic political decisions. You could hide your power level. You don't need to bring out that word every time. Hide your power level, advocate for the things. You know your end goal. All that matters is your values, your end goal. At this point, it's about being pragmatic and doing what makes sense to try and get those end goals into closer reach. But you can still evaluate things from a liberal democracy perspective on what would be best for the current system, even if you want something that's a system improved off what we have right now.
Go ahead,
So
Josiah.
I also want to say that there's a little bit of a
Yeah, you also just get depressed once you realize the world doesn't work. You know what I mean? You're just like, yeah, whatever. I'm a liberal.
Go ahead, Josiah.
I also want to say that there's a little bit of it's a tricky situation with politics right now, and in terms of like what you run on for your legislative agenda, because I feel like you're kind of damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. Like typically in this country, politicians will run on their agenda, and oftentimes it'll be a very ambitious agenda that maybe they even know they're likely not going to be able to get from the Congress that's elected that next session. So we heard, I feel like Joe Biden has got a lot of criticism for promising a $15 an hour minimum wage, and that didn't happen. Promising like more student loan debt, that didn't happen because of the Supreme Court and other factors. And so, if you run on I feel like if she gets a 50-50 Senate, which it looks like that's probably the best that we can get, and that even that's kind of a long shot right now.
Yeah.
The Senate's not looking great. I feel like she's taking a different approach of actually trying to promise policies that seem realistic in their ability to get done. Like if she was running on Medicare for all right now, it might get a lot of like young progressives excited, but there would be no way I think all of us would probably agree, there would be no way that would pass in the next Congress. And so it seems to be a different strategy that like Biden took with over promising. She seems to be going a more realistic route. I personally kind of appreciate that honesty, and I'm curious what you guys have to say about that.
She is running on getting rid of medical debt. That was one of the original things that she proposed in that first list that she put out. And there are Democratic governors across the country who are buying up medical debt for everybody in their state for pennies on the dollar, and then they're wiping it out. And
yeah, but the thing is, when you're Kamala right now, the voters that are like Liz Cheney Republicans, when you talk about eliminating medical debt, these are very self-serving, selfish people, to be very frank. Most humans are. and you could be a selfish person and be a good person. But when you say eliminate medical debt, you might think it sounds good, it's great. But for these voters who Kamala needs to get, all they hear is, oh crap, I'm going to have to pay for other people's medical debt. I'm not unhealthy. I have my health care. I have my good job. I don't want to pay for other people's medical debt to be eliminated. So bringing that out in a 2-month campaign is very difficult. And along the topics of socialism, yeah, there's too much wealth in the world, but we can at least make sure the owners of the world are philosophically in line with what is decent for humanity. And we could ideally or possibly have a future where human suffering is reduced to a minuscule level. And we still have the ownership class, but we still have a balance where we can have enjoyable lives and suffering across the globe is reduced.
Like that's
socialism is a little bit
I'd love to see, and that's something
far-fetched.
that she rolled out.
Actual
now,
socialism.
I would like to see her talk about that more, but to me, I almost have a slight disagreement in the sense that I think she's being a little more ambitious than you're giving her credit for. I think the $6,000 child tax credit is super ambitious, and I love that she's running on that.
Yeah. I guess here's what I would say is, again, there's a question of tactics and substance. So the student loan debt example.
Okay, yeah, okay. One more thing as well. I'm going to try not to pause again so I can go sleepy sleep. But
say is, again, there's a question of tactics and substance. So the student loan debt example is a really important one because this was not a policy that Joe Biden would have, I hope we all agree, probably would not have pursued if he wasn't under pressure in a Democratic primary situation. But he was under pressure, and so he promised a certain policy. Now, that policy, for a variety of reasons, was not able to come into fruition.
Some of it was.
But if he hadn't been forced on the campaign trail to take that position, then I don't think he would have done any of it because it wasn't so, like he dragged his feet about it. He wasn't in love with it, but because he had said this, he was under a lot of pressure by activists to get something done during his administration. And they actually have done a significant amount in terms of student loan debt relief.
Yes.
So on the substance, I think it actually is important that we get politicians on the record about promises they're making to the electorate.
Hey guys, this
yeah, being involved in politics does make you depressed. I am very anxious right now, very depressed. I don't really work in politics, but I still work in voting. So there's a lot going on right now. A lot of traveling, which I will be doing. And yeah, I can't really do politics casually. That's one reason I stopped doing YouTube for a while. And when it comes to wanting more socialist policies, if progressives, ideally Kamala wins, okay? If she doesn't win, we're going to have one of the worst 4 years of our lifetimes. Unless if anyone's over the age of 60, these will be the worst 4 years of your life, most likely, if Donald Trump wins. Most likely. And that's scary because we know the risk, we know the reward of not having that risk. But if Kamala wins, if progressives really have such successful policies and popular policies, then they will have 350 Democrats in the House elected next cycle. There will be 70 Democrats elected next cycle, and they will be running on populist messaging, and they will be proven correct, and it's not even going to need to be margins, because everyone's going to want progressive change so much that we're going to have so much of a mandate to do it, okay? If it's really that popular. But the big issue is social and culture war is all that matters for most voters. Most voters have zero information. So we need some way to master the information cycle so people are informed and so they understand what policies mean and so they want to join our team, all right? If we had the same enthusiasm that we have right now for every single election across the country, we would go in a radically better direction. And we already are making huge strides, and we have during the Biden administration. But people still believe, from where I'm from, rural areas, they believe New York City is the most dangerous place in the world to walk around. It's crime, you're going to get shot, you're going to be killed if you go there. New York City is literally one of the most safe places on the earth in the rich areas. And every city has their poor areas, they're going to have higher crime. But New York City in general is one of the safest cities on earth. But if you ask them what's more dangerous, New York City, Los Angeles, or Paris, they'd probably say Paris. When if you know anything about that, Paris is much, much, much more dangerous than New York City. But the perception is messed up. So how do we master that perception and make those changes in these in-between gaps when pop politics isn't cool? But I think it's actually pretty good that I don't make money off this stuff because I can give actual opinions. I don't need to make up fake complaints. I think Kyle Kulinski and Crystal Ball are only complaining about the Liz Cheney thing because they need content, honestly. They need something to talk about. Their brains are wired to find the next hot thing they can discuss. So that's why they're hyper-focusing on whatever Kamala doesn't do and nitpicking that. But credit where it's due. Kyle Kulinski is giving her tons of credit and calling out Trump super aggressively every single day. So I love that. But Kyle Kulinski should be endorsing Kamala Harris. He should be endorsing voting for Kamala Harris in any state. Not the whole, vote for Jill Stein if you're not in a swing state thing. No. Full-throated, okay? You should be voting Kamala Harris if you are a progressive. If you are a progressive and you do not vote Kamala Harris this election, and I'm going to make a video about this. I've been writing it. It's not going to be that big of a deal. But I want to have a couple think pieces that I'm proud of at least. I want to be proud of a couple videos I can put out before the election and what I say in them. But a big topic is just, if you don't vote Kamala, you're not a progressive. You are not a progressive. You're not. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Also, channel memberships are open. They start at $3. You get a special badge in the comments, highlighted comments, and also I will respond to everything, special emotes, special private chats to get more insight into my personal organizing life, maybe possible races I can run for, so you can support that as well with only $3 a month or higher tiers. That'd be awesome. But yeah, it takes a couple hours a day to make these videos. It'd be great to have your support.